Well, when I was asked to speak at this function tonight by Rob McGavin, I said to him, what do you want me to speak about? And he said, well, why don't you speak about something you know something about? And that was pretty limiting. So after a bit of discussion, he said, well, why don't you just reflect a few things about the waterfront dispute? That'll get you through. So that's what we're going to do tonight. It occurred to me as the prize giving was going on that many of the students here tonight probably weren't even born when the waterfront dispute was on. It was 18 years ago. If they were born, they were quite young, and so they'll be wondering what the hell is this old codger up here talking about, some waterfront dispute we've never heard of. But there you go. Seeing all these prize givings or medal givings out tonight, it reminded me when I was young and courting my wife-to-be, I used to boast to her that I was dux of my school, and I made one terrible mistake. I invited her to the 20th reunion of that school, and the words, as we left the function, her words still ringing in my ears. She said, "It's not a school you'd want to have finished second." That doesn't apply to the Marcus Oldham School, I can assure you, by the generous advice I've been given about it. I wanted to actually lean on you tonight to see what you think the waterfront dispute was all about in 1998, all those years ago. Was it an industrial negotiation that got out of control? Was it a dispute over management's rights? Was it a conspiracy to remove the MUA from the waterfront? Or was it an attempt to reduce pay or conditions? Who thinks it was number one? Nobody. Oh, 1, 2, 3, few. Number 2? A few more. Number 3. Who thinks it was number 3? Not many? Nobody's got any idea, you see, you're all too young. And was it an attempt to reduce pay and conditions? Not really that either. Well, it was one of them, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. Perhaps before I tell you that, I'll just give you some idea how I got myself into this mess. It was mentioned that I'd started a development capital fund, and in 1990 we were offered a chance to buy a small interest in a company called Strang Patrick, which had very small waterfront interests because someone had exercised a roulette clause on them, and they were keen to have a new investor. So we bought that. Soon after, we got involved in winning the tender to develop East Swanson Dock, which was to be a container terminal, about three to four berths. And then over time we also acquired significant other interests in the waterfront from A&L and Howard Smith. And so by about 1995 we'd ended up with about 50% of all the container terminal capacity in Australia. And I frankly had very little idea what I'd inherited or I'd purchased. I'll just give you a small anecdote. I went to Port Botany, the container terminal in Sydney, and I thought, in those naive days, I thought if I just go along and I chat to a few people and try to get the lie of the land, understand what their concerns are, maybe I'll see a way forward here where we can negotiate a sensible outcome to what was pretty desperate productivity. So I went to the canteen and I got my lunch at the canteen, went over with my tray and sat at a table. Within about less than 1 minute, the entire table was cleared. Everybody had gone, but not just that table, all the tables around me had been cleared. So I'm sitting in splendid isolation, eating pretty revolting food. I looked across and I saw lots of people playing billiards in one corner, and then there were card games going over here, and other things going on, and I thought, this is very odd. So I went from there and said to the chief executive, the terminal manager, how many people are working here today? He said, oh, I have no idea. I said, well, the people down there that are playing cards and playing, are they on a break, or is this a shift? What are they doing? No idea. I said, well, who does know? He said, well, you'd have to go and talk to the allocators. Who are the allocators? He said, well, they're the unions people. And we had absolutely no idea what was going on. We had no idea who was on the site. We had no idea what they were supposed to be doing. And it was pretty clear to me that the union was running the business at that point. Probably the time to tell my favourite little anecdote about the waterfront, and that was that the two wharfies standing together having a chat, which they're prone to do, have a long chat, and after a while one of the wharfies just went like this and he stamped on a snail, and the other wharfie said to him, what did you do that for? He said, that bugger's been following me around all day. So, I realised that we really needed to do something to improve the productivity, and I thought, well, best place to start would be to go and see Bill Kelty, ACTU Secretary, and his offsider Greg Combay. And so I went down to their offices and told them that my dilemma, and I'll never forget this till the day I go. Bill Kelty went into a speech which became kind of fervent religious speech by the end of it. And he was, at the end, he just kept saying things like, I love this union. I love this union. I thought, my God, I mean, really, this is difficult. And as we were ushered out of the meeting, Greg Combay sort of said to me, you realise this is pretty important to the union movement, and you better take very conventional routes to resolve this, and you've got to tread carefully. And so I went down that path. We negotiated, spent a year negotiating an agreement, and by the end of 1996 we'd reached agreement with the unions on some very modest changes. Put it up to the workforce, voted down. Put it up again, voted down. So I went back to Combay and said, look, I've done everything you've said, we've taken a very conventional route, and this thing just keeps... Oh, he said, I'll come down and convince them. So he came down and implored the workers for about an hour, and finally they agreed to put that up. And then we attempted to implement it. Well, that was absolutely zero chance. There was not a chance in hell we could get anything implemented that had been agreed. And so I decided at that point that we really needed to take some serious unconventional action, and I needed a plan A and a plan B, and by the end of it I needed a plan A to Z actually, but that's another story. I'm not going to go into all that. We'd be here all night if I talked you through the actual dramas that took place during that very difficult period. I do want to show you though, was it a success? And so I've dug out of my archives a few charts to just show you. I might step down here perhaps. These were the production rates, containers per net crane hour in 1996-98, and here's what happened after the dispute in 2002. Incidentally, we were told by the Maritime Union that these were all that was possibly achievable. This was absolutely the best that was achieved. The ships were too small, blah, 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 all the excuses. Here we are in 2002. Have a look at the numbers. Here's here's the performance from 98, which is the end of the dispute. Look at the progressive improvement over a number of years that took place in the GUs per hour. I'm having a bit of trouble with this not working. There we go. This was, this is straddle productivity, the number of straddle movements or time it takes for a straddle movement within the terminal. Labour productivity, have a look at these, have a look at these graphs. Can't go back now. Oops. There we are. This was the productivity. This is number of persons per container shift for 98, about less than 2, 92, 2.5, and by 2002 we were up to 10.5. Here's another measure, if I can get it to work. There we are. Bit quick. Well, while we're, here we are. This is container movements per employee in the various terminals. Look at Perth here. Fremantle 600, and by the end of a couple of years later it was at 1700. So the improvements were there. This is interesting. This is employee days lost back to 88, 1,000 days per 1,000 employees, up to 2,000 days. 2002, zip. Absolutely no days lost for any disputes. And the charges went down, notwithstanding the fact that inflation in those days was going up. The waterfront charges went down, and finally Access Economics said that by, I think, 2002, they said on virtually any measure in the study, Australia is at, close to or superior to world's best practice. So it gives you a sense of, was it a success? Absolutely, on that front it was an incredible success. But the real success to me wasn't the actual productivity. The real success was the transformation that took place within the workforce. After the dispute, well, prior to the dispute, as I mentioned earlier, the union allocated people, and they were just allocated all over the place. They never worked together in more than once in, every couple of years. There was no camaraderie, there was nothing. And so after the dispute, we decided we would introduce the idea of teams. And so we picked team leaders, and those team leaders were based around a crane and all of the activities that took place on that crane. And we said, you're the team leader, go and pick your team out of the people that were left. And the smart team leaders went and picked really good people. Some of them just picked whoever was around or who they knew. And then at the end of all that, there was still a few left, and we put them into their own team, the rejects, and excuse the language, but they were actually designated the shit team. And I'll come back to them in a moment. But what was incredible is from that moment, and you saw the productivity gradually improving, from the moment that we put people into teams, you could see that there was a huge difference between one team to the next in terms of their performance. And they were being rewarded with bonuses based on their shift performance. But when I knew that we'd really achieved something sensational was when I discovered that some of the team leaders were organising private barbecues for their team, which they were funding, in order to have a meal, have a few drinks, but basically to discuss how they could do better next week, how they could actually improve their performance. I mean, that shift in mentality is absolutely amazing. I mean, when you think back in 1996, the union was fining people if they worked too fast, literally fining them. they'd single them out, bring them in, you're being fined for working too hard. Now we've got shift leaders organising on the weekend in their own personal time to get their team together to discuss how they could actually improve productivity. It's an incredible change. And our friends in the shit team, well, not surprisingly, they started off right on the bottom of the ladder. And their reaction was interesting though. They didn't sort of give up or, give the two fingers. They actually were embarrassed, and they started to improve and to concentrate themselves, and they gradually got themselves off the bottom row, and they were never got to the top, but they certainly improved. And that graph that I show, those various graphs, showed you that the improvement was gradual, and a lot of that was actually the lesser teams actually putting in their contribution as well. So what's the moral of all this stuff? To me, it tells me that people really do want to work productively. It's not in our DNA to be negative. It's not in our DNA to be difficult, but you've got to provide the environment in which people can actually work productively, and you've got to give them the incentive and the goal. And that incentive doesn't have to be purely monetary. It can be praise, or it can be reward, it can be acknowledgement from their fellow workers. So in the old world, the union was running the place, and the culture that they set was that we were in a class war. They saw it as a class war. It's the workers against the capital, and we've got to do everything we can to destroy capital. That was the mentality that was in that place when we first got involved in it. What we did was basically liberated the entrepreneurial spirits within these people. Same people, by and large, or all together the same people. We liberated their entrepreneurial spirits, and when you do that, humans intuitively, instinctively want to progress. They want to be respected by their fellow workers and others, and they basically want to be loved. And if you can picture that, orphies just want to be loved. Thank you.